We have the print actions page fully bound now, so all of these properties work and bind to real view models. The next step I think we need is to be able to create a new one. We can delete the existing ones, but we can't make any new. If we take a look at the mockup we made, I put a new print button inside of this list view. Now, although it looks cool on the preview, it's probably not the best design practice because we are mixing a list in our view with an action button doing something else. It's possible, and we can do this with view models and binding, and we'll take a look, but we might want to rethink where we put this button. So just bear that in mind as we go along. Let's just jump in and see how we can make this new action button to create some new items in this list, and then update this view with the new properties. We start in here, the actions print view, and this is the page we want to work on. Just remember this is bound to the actions page view model, not the action print view model, because the items inside are sub-items of the top level view model. That means we want to take a look in this view model here. And let's just fix some of these warnings. So Ryder's given us a few warnings about things that we should do better. So this one is saying it's a non-nullable field, and that's because right now this isn't a question mark, and we're expecting this to never be null based on our declaration here. So we've got two options. We can tell it that we want it to be null like this, which means we need to handle the fact that this could be null. And when we reference things and do things further down, whenever we want to say do this, we'd need to say do this to make sure we handle nullable checks. In my eyes, I think what we'll do instead is let's force the print list to never be null by initializing it here. And that will give us further warnings if we ever tried to set it to null, say further down. I think if we set the underlying property to null, we'll get the warning. And will we get the warning if we set the upper one to null? Yeah, so there's the problem where we can no longer set it to null by mistake, which is good. And it's initialized correctly. Same thing for this, I presume, a null issue, which it is. And in this case, there may not be something selected, because in here, when we toggle between, there's nothing currently selected. Now, if there was no items in this list, if we deleted everything, then it's not possible to select anything. So there is an option where the selected item may not be anything, and then we probably want to update this UI at some point if there's nothing selected, to maybe just mention create a new print action and another copy of the button here to do that. So for this one, we will make it nullable, and that will get rid of that warning. Now for the actual list and putting a button inside of here. I don't think that's the way we want to go, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but let's just take a look at what I would do if that's what we want to achieve. We can see this list. If we scroll to this list item here, it's bound to a print list. And this print list is part of the actions page view model. And this is meant to represent the list of print items. So this list can't contain another element to say, oh, it's a new button, and then handle it in the view. That means if we want to add something to the view, we need another list, and the view model needs to be aware of this situation in this case, because it wouldn't make sense otherwise. It's very hard to do. So straight away, we're kind of not necessarily breaking MVVM by having the view model aware of the view in some case, which is a violation, but it might also be simply baked into the expected user behavior. So the view model might expect that you want the view to have the behavior of a new button inside of a list. And you can see where that starts to force the view to be a certain way, which is what you try to avoid. So that's the first sign that we shouldn't probably do this. But let's say we did. What I would do is make another observable property. And it wouldn't need to be observable actually. It'd just be a public getter. And it would be a list, just the same. And then we'd probably say this would be a visual print list. So this is the one that the view is going to see with the extra button. And this could always be, we probably want to do a getter like this, and we'd make a new visual print list, and we could have that equal to the print list itself. You could then in the print list add a new element, and this could be a new actions page view model, and then you could return the print list. And then every time the print list updates, we could do observable or notify property changed for name of visual print list. And now if we inside of here set something up to say job name equals new action, just so we can see something, You can see this is telling us to reference the main list directly, so let's just do that. We should now be able to bind to visual print list instead. And what this should do is give us an extra element. So when we compile, we should see a constant and extra element. There you go, called new action. And that isn't actually in the print list. And then what we'd want to do further after that is to have the actions print view model have a property in here to be aware of whether it's designed to be, say, a custom action like a button. So this would end up having, say, a private void or a public void, say, do something action. And in here, we'd probably want to return, well, we won't go too far down the rabbit hole, but let's say we'd want something there to do something. And in here, we'd also need a property saying private boolean is custom action. And we do this. And then in here, we could say is custom action equals true. And finally in the view, what we could do is have a, say just a stack panel above here. Move the grid inside. Have a button below where the content, it might as well be bound to job name. You can see there, everything's now got this extra button. You could have this grid then is visible, bound to the is custom action. And you want it to be not is custom action. And then this button, you want the is visible, bound to the is custom action. And then you start seeing how you can now have an item inside of here, styling different, and then you could bind this button to some action behind. You've got one problem, which is the styles. The fact you've got these kind of list item styles involved. You've got this click behind visual, which I've no idea how that's even happening. It's some kind of glitch with the button being inside of a list view. So you can see already this starts to be a little bit cumbersome. So if we just undo all that visual, we don't want to do that. You can see how it would be done though. You'd ultimately then just have a custom action in here you could override, and when you new up the list here, you could pass in, say we made that into an actual delegate that you could use like an action, you could override it here, say it was called some action, and you'd do this, and make your code here to do whatever you want it to do. But that's not what we're going to do, because, like I say, it kind of violates MVVM in a way, and we can find a much better and cleaner way of doing this. Just clean up anything we added, so that's those there, and we're back to where we started. So instead of doing that, let's go into this view, and let's just add the button above. Let's just keep it simple. So all we'll do is update this grid. So we currently have the auto, which is print actions, then a 10 space, then auto for the text, then a 10 space, and then the star is this list. So before the star, we want another auto for the button and another padding for the 10. We want to move this row down 2, and now we can chuck a button in between here with a grid.row of 4, and we'll have the content of new print action, we could call it. We'll do a class of small and outline. That looks nice. And then I think we'll just stretch it. So we'll do a horizontal alignment center and horizontal content alignment, horizontal alignment stretch and horizontal content alignment center. Let's just take a look at that in the application, make sure we're happy with that. Go to actions, and there we go, that's nice. It's still subtle, but it's still obvious that when we click it, we can make a new action. Now we need to actually make this do something, so it needs to add an item to this list. And because it's all view model bound, this should be super easy. We will want to go into the actions page view model, because remember, this view is bound to the page model, not the individual items. So we want this one. We've already got commands like this, so we just need to add another command. We'll go below this one, public void, and we'll call it add new print item. We don't need to pass anything in for now. And then here, the first thing we want to do is create a new item. That will be new item equals new print view model. we'll set the name up. So we'll give it some default text to start with, otherwise it's just blank and looks a bit strange. And we'll say this one is new print item. And then we want to add to the print list. So print list dot add new item. Let's start with that. Tag it with a relay command. And then if we go to the button there, we can have the command for the binding, and we have the new print item command. So if we compile, we don't need to run this, it should run in this designer. We click, and there we go. We can now make a load of new items. There's still some things to improve on this though, because when we click a new print item, I'd expect for one, this to be selected. So we want it to auto select and then see here. Let's try and do that. Now it might be super easy because we have the new item dot is selected. So we should be able to set that to true. And the reason I think, let's just do control dot on this as well, make the constructor easier. The reason I think this might work is because of the binding we've already done. And I think it's in here. Yeah, so this binding I think will do all the magic for us. Because what we have is a style on the list box item, and it's binding to the is selected, which gets set when you click in this. This is selected gets set and will bind to the is selected property of this view model. This is selected, which is what we've set here. Now this is actually a two-way binding by default. So what that should mean is when we've set this up to is selected, it should go backwards and bind to the list box items is selected. And when that fires, if the list box, which I'm not sure of, monitors for when the is selected items change inside of items, it should automatically then update the selected item and the visual and everything should just bubble up. That's if this list box has been designed with the two-way binding on the is selected in mind, which I'm kind of hoping they do. If not, then we can still do, but it's going to require a bit more code. So now if we click there, you can see that it's selected the item, click a new, and that looks like it's working great. So that's all thanks to this. If we remove this style, say, and rebuild, click new item, you can see it doesn't work. So even though you can visually select, because this isn't binding two-way back to the is selected, the UI and the backend don't link correctly. But luckily, that's worked perfect for us. So there's a piece of code that would have been hard to do. It's actually now really simple. It's already working. One more thing, again, you have to think of the nice to haves for the user. So you want this to be the cleanest experience possible with the least clicks possible. If I'm going to make a new action, I click here. It's selected here. It's put info here. But then the first thing I probably want to do is name the job. So instead of a pop-up box, which is ugly and extra steps, we've got the job name here. We want to really probably pre-focus this and pre-select the text, so that when the user clicks new action, they can then start typing on the keyboard the name. They don't even have to move the mouse, select, highlight this text. It's just done for us. So this can be tricky. What we're trying to do now is on an action, which is in a view model. So we go to this view model, we're inside of a view model here. And when we've added a new item, we want to now magically select something in the view, which again is going to break MVVM. The view model should not be aware of the view, but the view can be fully aware of the view model and manipulate it. That's general rule of thumb. You don't want the view model being aware of the view, because then what happens is the view model is dictating to the view, which is the thing that's meant to be replaceable, exactly how it needs to be, or in some way limiting it. So you never want the view model to access the view, but you can have the other way around. Now, because this is an item on the view, this selecting the text doesn't exist in the view model, we have to think about this slightly differently. The first hurdle is when we click this new print action and it runs this command. We can't fire anything in here realistically, because this is doing its job and it's doing what it should do, and we don't want to add logic into here that tells it to do something it shouldn't. But what it is doing is adding something to the print list. So we need a way for this UI to fire an event whenever, ultimately whenever this button's clicked, but that also correlates to whenever there's a new item in this list. But that isn't what we want to do. If we made a new item and it wasn't selected, we don't care. The answer is really when the item gets selected is when we want to do something. So when you click new print action, it's going to make an item and select it. So we want to hook into when any item gets selected and then we want to do something. That should be fairly simple. In the list box, we can have here selection changed and just tab twice to create some code in the background. And now in here, this is where we want to try and say select the text box. So let's just start with selecting every time we change anything, it just selects the text in the job name. And then we'll try to limit that to when we click in new action. In the selections, changed events will have access to the selected item. So what we can do is first get if the added item 0, and we can always check for null here in case there's no added items just removed. And if that is, it will be the actions print view model, remember, because what we have is the view locator, which converts our view models into content. And inside of our view here, it's bound, so the item source, the thing that's been selected, is an actions page view model print list. And the print list is a list of actions print view model. So that all boils down to meaning these items, as you select them, will be actions print view models. So this is a good way to then check for null if nothing's selected. If something is selected, get the first item. And if that item is of this type, it will enter this if statement. Otherwise, if that's null or it's not of this type, this just never gets hit. So that's a really clean way of getting access to the view model. And then we need to give it a name here so we can access the resolved name. And we'll call it view model. So that's done a load of things in one for us. Instead of doing, say, if e.added item equals null, return, and then var item equals e.added item 0, if item is actions print view model, and then inside of here doing var view model equals actions print view model item and doing something, all of that code is ultimately done in that one line. So that's what you're kind of looking at for old school logic here. That's what all of these checks do. So e added item question mark is this. It won't return after that. Getting the item and then checking if it is an item is this and this. And then this cast is simply done by putting the name there. So that's all the advancements in C#. With all that done, we should hit here every time we have a new element selected. So next we need to access, and bear in mind we're in the view here, so we can access the view. This isn't the view model, this is still the view. We want to access this job name here, so this text box. If we scroll down and find job name, there it is. We want this text box here that is bound to the selected item print job name. To access that, we'll just give it a name. So we'll call this the job name text box. Now in the background, we can access this. And then that's as simple as now saying, is there a select all? Yep, there is. Select all the text and job name.focus to make the keyboard focus on that text box as well. So if that's right, every time we now select an item, it should focus and select the text for us. So we go to actions, click, and there you go, perfect first time. So you can click in, type away, click in, type away, click new, type away. So that's what we want. And the only thing left then is now we want to limit this highlighting of text only when it's a new item. And also the new item flag needs to be present because when we start tabbing away like this and we've made changes, the next thing we need to do is warn the user first that, hang on a minute, you've not saved or cancelled. You've got to do one of the actions. So we might want to cancel the selection change from happening prior to it happening and warn the user. But either way, these view models need to be aware of whether they are saved or not. And when we come to committing them to data, that's also something that has to be in the view model. So that means in the actions print view model, we also need another property, and we can call this, we can either call it unsaved, or we can call it first display or something if you want something to happen only on first display, which I think is one and the same really, because you only ever want to select the text when it's first displayed, and you can't tab away from it until you decide you're going to save it or effectively remove it. So we might as well just call this one is saved. We'll make that an observable property. And now what we can do when we have the view model, which makes the new item, we can select this as is saved equals false. Or usually what you want to do with your logic is default the logic to being where you want it to be. And I think when you're loading items in from the back end, you want it to be already set correctly. So instead of is saved, we want the logic to be inverted. So we want to say probably is new or is unsaved. We'll call it is new. Is new item, there we go. Now all of the ones we add automatically are set without explicitly having to say that the new items, whereas the time when it is a new item, we're going to set it to true explicitly. Back in the part here, we can now limit this further, and we can say and view model dot is new item. So now we only want to be if it's a new item. This has got something to improve in a pattern for us. I did not even know that was a thing. I totally forgot about that for C#. So you can actually also match it on whether it is this type, and then set properties on that type inside of the kind of pseudo constructor to pattern match to whether the properties inside match. So that's a really cool way of doing it. And now that should do exactly what we want. So let's now see, go to actions, click print new, it's selected for us, which is what we want. Tab away. So there is something else we kind of want and we don't. When you tab away, it's not selecting these. When you tab in, it's reselecting the text. But as we mentioned, creating a new item and typing and tabbing away shouldn't exist. That's something we're going to change going forward. So instead of clicking here to tab away, it would warn if you wanted to save new. That wasn't too bad with the view model binding making this a lot easier and all the UI updating automatically for us. You can start to see the power of the MVVM framework. It really makes all this kind of UI work nice and easy. I think next up what we'll do is probably make this option where we said to save or close and prevent tabbing away. And then after that we can start committing this to a real backend database. And we have then a fully functional page. This is then ready to go and be used to do something in the application. And we can move on to these other pages then.